Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Home Studio Simplified show. We got a very special guest on the show today, an individual that I've really been wanting to interview. He recently was with one of our channel favorites, Warren Hewart, and they were looking over some awesome stuff over there. But I wanted to bring him on specifically because he's got a new album that's coming out, and I just wanted to talk to the guy. He seems like a really cool guy. So Dave Kerzner is going to be on the show. He is an American musician, songwriter, producer, and sound designer, as well as the founder of the sound sampling development company Sonic Reality, Inc. His debut solo album, New World, was released in December of 2014, and since then, he's been steadily releasing new music. During his music career, Kerzner has had the wonderful opportunity to work with artists and bands such as Alan Parsons, Sweet, Genesis, Francis Dunnery, and We're Not Worthy, Neil Peart, Keith Emerson, Tom Waits, and Smashing Pumpkins. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I give to you Dave Kerzner. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. Dave, so good having you, man.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
I am a huge Rush fan, so like right out of the gate, I'm already I'm like chomping at the bit here. I gotta know, what was that like, man?
Well, okay, so the story of that is, first of all, I've been a huge Rush fan since I was a kid. So like, I guess Moving Pictures was the first album that I got into, and then I think Signals was the first Rush concert tour I saw, which I love that album. I think it's my favorite Rush album. And anyway, so as you had mentioned, I have a company called Sonic Reality. We it's been around since the 90s. I started off creating sounds for keyboards for companies like Roland, Alesis, Yamaha, and kind of focusing on vintage instruments, the keyboards. I'm a keyboard player. And but I also sampled a lot of drums. And later on, and I think around 2010, well, right around the time when Rush was mixing Snakes and Arrows.
Ooh.
And they were doing it at Ocean Way Studios in Hollywood, California. And I was working on a product with Sonic Reality called Ocean Way Drums. So I was there while they were doing it.
Sweet.
And I also work with a company called IK Multimedia. So I knew that Getty and Alex liked IK Multimedia software like Amplitube and different, things. So, but I was told, there's kind of a rule at a studio, which is when artists are there, you don't talk to them unless they talk to you, because it's their safe place to just work. So I wasn't going to talk to them, but then I think but Alex came over and said hi and everything. And then Andy Curran, who actually is in Alex's current band, but he was their A&R person at the label Anthem. And I was just talking to him, and he loved IK and Amplitube too, because he plays bass. And we were just talking about some stuff. And I was kind of joking around. And I said to him, hey, by the way, if Neil Peart ever wants to do its drum sample library, let me know. I didn't really think that he would. And then I don't know how many months later, Andy calls me up and he's like, you still want to do that sample library with Neil? I'm like, of course. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, can you be in LA tomorrow? And I live in Miami. So I used to live in LA, but to fly, I was like, you just say yes. You don't even think about it. Yep. Okay. Everything's canceled tomorrow. We'll be there.
I will crawl there if I have to.
Yeah. So we just, I got one of my guys to come with me, and and Neil wanted Nick Raskulinecz, who produced the last few Rush albums, to engineer it. And I said, great, and Ocean Way helped me out with, and the drum channel and DW. I mean, everybody, the earth moved for Neil, it was kind of like anything Neil wants. And of course, I got on well with him too, just because he knows, it's one of, we love him. I miss him. He just was so cool. And I didn't even meet him. I never met him before that. I didn't even meet him at Ocean Way, but when we were there, I mean, and it was kind of hilarious because his drum tech, Lauren, He has this, he had this immaculate DW kit that was customized for him. And when we do this sampling, what I do usually, I mean, I've sampled Terry Bozzio, I've sampled Billy Cobham, I've sampled some of the best drummers in the world. And there's a process where they play grooves and then they play the way they hit the drums. And then someone like me comes and hits all the other areas of the drum so that you can reanimate it and have it be digitized and played any way you want. So you don't have to just play it like Neil. You could play it like hitting the edge or doing other things. And I usually don't have the drummers do that because it's extremely tedious. And it's kind of like you have to do all this list of things. But Lauren said to me, his tech, he's like, "Oh, no. Nobody touches Neil's drums except for Neil." And I'm like, okay. Do it. And so he started to do it. And like literally like 5 minutes in, he's like, Neil's like, no, he can do it. Let him do it. So yeah.
Well, man, that is an awesome story. So doing this this drum library with Neil, like where all did that show up? Was that in an IK Multimedia product in and of itself, or where did that?
It was, although I might revisit that. And now that the Sample-Tank 4 engine, which is, there's been different versions of IK's sample player, which is called Sample-Tank. And one of the strengths of it has always been that it has built-in effects, because IK is known for studio effects and guitar effects and everything, T-Rax and, really good quality recreations of compressors and EQs, and then also the guitar effects. And excuse me. So, but it was late to the game to have things like hard disk streaming. I don't want to get too technical, or maybe I can, I don't know. But so certain formats like BFD or Kontakt had that for a while. So I released Sonic Reality released Neil Peart drums for Kontakt, for BFD, and in full size, where you could mix the microphone channels and everything. And then the version for Sample-Tank that's been out is really for Sample-Tank 3. It'll work in Sample-Tank 4, which is a current version. And it's stereo, and it's like kind of a lighter version, which has its benefits too, because sometimes you want to just kind of like, pull it up and go.
Right.
And so, but that said, now that there's new features in Sample-Tank 4, I'm looking to revisit that and some other great libraries. And actually, there's a whole bunch that I've done. You mentioned Alan Parsons. I did one of the coolest like pinch me sessions recording Nick Mason, the drummer of Pink Floyd, with Alan Parsons engineering and me producing.
What?
Using the original console, not the exact. Well, actually, no. One sidecar was the exact one from Dark Side of the Moon, but the same one that wasn't at Abbey Road that we did the session, but it was the same EMI TG12345 console. I don't know why they called it that, by the way. I think they were just lazy. Like, what do we call it? I don't know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm busy. But anyway, they're rare consoles. They sound really cool. And I remember this, and that's coming for Sample-Tank as well. So I was going to say, but and we released an Alan Parsons piano that we sampled. But there was this one moment. I think you'll like this, because this is sort of these little story moments that, because I'm a music fan. So, and we're probably about the same age. And so, if you're a Rush fan or a Pink Floyd fan or an Alan Parsons fan, I am too. So imagine, but I have to keep my cool. Can't be a fanboy in that situation.
Right.
Totally professional. But then, and I was, and then there was this one moment where Nick is in the live room, and he says, "Is that okay, Dave?" And then Alan turns to me and goes, "Yeah, is that okay?" And I'm like, "You're asking me?" I didn't say that. I'm thinking to myself, is this really happening? Because these two guys haven't gotten together since they did Dark Side of the Moon.
Right.
And here we all got together in this private thing that was just for, a sample library, but it was a historic, cool moment. And then just to be in it, working with them. And one of the things that I really loved about that situation was, even though, you said, "Oh, we're not worthy," and like we put these greats, they are legends, on a pedestal sometimes, but it's also great to just kind of level playing field and just like treat everybody like just a regular person, the
Right.
musician. And that's how it felt. It didn't feel like, oh, could you sign my breasts, or anything weird. Take a pic. I think we took some pictures, but I mean, there wasn't anything. It was musicians in a room, musicians and engineers in a room working, and it could have been my buddies who are my age. It could have been anybody, and that's how it felt. It didn't feel like there was some kind of anything condescending or any kind of like superiority or anything weird. It was just kind of like, and they were asking me my opinion because that was my role, and I was like, I was just guiding them as if it was like totally cool. Like everyone's humble. I love that kind of stuff. I've seen a lot in the music industry, but when I see people who have accomplished that much, just being normal people in the studio, it's a good feeling. It's good to see.
I think it goes without saying that in every interview that I ever seen with Neil, or honestly any band, any of the band members of Rush, or all of those guys seem like incredibly humble guys, and they also seem like they're like behind the scenes, like they're pulling pranks on each other, like jokesters, and I just love that realism to them. I think that's probably why they resonated so well with me, is because I was kind of like I wasn't really the nerdy kid, but I was also not the popular guy that wanted to hang out with everyone in school. And so like Subdivisions and songs like that, man, they just resonated with me. And actually, in fact, as a guitar player, to this day, I still attribute Alex Lifeson to being one of my biggest influences. Growing up, my dad was playing Rush 2112 Overture in the other room, and I was like, what is that? And I run in there and I'm like, and then that's when they break into the actual song, and I'm like, who is that band and who's that girl singing? And he's like, whoa, whoa, son. And he's like, this is Rush. You will treat it with respect,
Well, you have, first of all, I'm working on something with Alex. I can't say what it is yet, but it is going to be awesome. And when I can, we can talk again.
Nice. Nice.
But another thing I'm doing is, and I started this a while ago. I actually started this in 2012, and I put out an EP of like a Rush tribute EP that was just about moving pictures. And now they're celebrating the 40th or 41st, because of the pandemic, anniversary of moving pictures. And I recorded. I have some cool versions of those songs that we did as well. They're kind of hybrid. It's a tribute album, but Neil's on drums through the library that I did. So everyone's playing with Neil. So we have Rick Emmett from Triumph singing Red Barchetta.
Nice.
All kinds of cool guests doing different songs, from Signals, from Moving Pictures, mainly Permanent Waves to Signals, which is my favorite era. And I had a lot of the drum tracks for that, and then a few extras. So I'm going to put out the entire album this year. I think there's a song from Grace Under Pressure on there too. But anyway, I'm a big Rush fan, but I think, it's nice to be able to, like you said, pay respect. I like to turn other people on to music too, of different generations. And sometimes through what I do, I can reach different people, and through IK or Sonic Reality, and yeah. So, and it's just kind of fun too, because, and one of the things that we're doing is just the twist with Billy Sherwood from Yes and a few others. Glass Hammer also did this, where we actually, in addition to just doing covers like anybody could do, we took Neil's drum tracks and wrote our own songs over them. So there's original songs, but with Neil playing. And that's part of the reason why he wanted to do it, is he's so cool. He was like, all right, thinking like, I can't play sessions for people. That's not really what I do. When he was alive, it was busy, but so many people would ask. And I think he played with Vertical Horizon, who I guess he was friends with, and a few lucky people outside of Russia got to play with him. But it wasn't that he was completely opposed to it. He just, it wasn't his thing. He wasn't a session drummer like that. So we did the library thinking, forever, even past, him being alive, that people could actually interact with his sound and his playing and play along with him and all that stuff. So he was really cool in that way. But, like you said, they're all very, very nice people.
I'd also like to give a huge shout out to IK Multimedia because this channel, myself, I'm a huge fan. And I gotta say, like back whenever I was like 1,000 subscribers and was like nobody on the face of the map, I reached out to them with a cold email that was probably the worst written email ever, and was like, "Look, guys, like being all grovelly, like, look, guys, I love your products, but I'm not big yet. But would you please like allow me to use some of your products so that I can review them and maybe give them away?" And IK Multimedia jumped on it, and to this day, actually, we're still in the process of wrapping up a song contest and giveaway with them right now. So they are so like intertwined with the music community, big and small. But to me, to think that you and them all had this hand in sort of not only commemorating but creating this memorial of Neil's drum sounds and stuff, like it's like you almost like were able to keep him around a little bit longer for that next generation to say, hey, look, and it's obviously it's going to make them hopefully go down that rabbit trail and be like, well, who is this guy? Why does he have a drum library? Because I think that's one of those things that when you discover someone like that, there's these musicians that over time, they're going to resonate differently with other different people. But when you find those kind of musicians that resonate with you, it's what really catapults someone into from being like, I'm just a casual musician, into like, wow, I want to share this message. I want to be like that.
I like to connect the dots between certain things that I find inspiring or valuable, and sometimes that's so, like, for instance, there's the knowledge and history of musicians and music and studios, and then there's something about them that is an element that could actually be captured and used by musicians. And that's what interests me, is connecting the dots between those two to be like, all right, like for instance, you mentioned Warren Hewitt. Just a few weeks ago, I went with Warren and his team, Produce Like a Pro. They're great. They're fantastic, as you know, to Fame Studios in Alabama, Muscle Shoals, Alabama, because we were, combining him doing all sorts of cool episodes of his show there, talking about the history of the studio and various things that will be coming out. And then also about the plugin that we made called Fame Studio Reverb. We made Sunset Sound Studio Reverb and now Fame Studio Reverb. And I was a big proponent of that because this is recreating the acoustic sounds of the rooms and echo chambers and also the plate reverbs. But these are things that we don't have. Like here, I'm in my home studio. I have a real studio, professional studio, commercial studio, but I also work in my home studio, and I've got Auralex on the walls, and it's just a little home studio, a little nook in my home. But what I don't have is a big live room and an echo chamber and
Right.
So most people don't, but that's an element to be able to add in through software, through as a plugin for Pro Tools, Cubase, Logic, all the Ableton, whatever someone uses in software, and it actually recreates the sounds accurately, in cooperation with the studios to be the official, studio reverb that's with them, and it just, but it's also like educating. So like when you use Sunset Sound Studio Reverb, these rooms, it could be the room that the Doors or Led Zeppelin used, or Eddie Van Halen's guitar went through the echo chamber of Studio One for Eruption and things like that. Has a sound, a distinct sound. And so to be able to, some of these studios are not even around anymore. So I feel like I'm even a little late to the game to kind of do this, but the technology is now available to do it right. And for the studios that are still around that we've done, I've got a few surprises coming, that it's amazing to be able to look, just to know like the history of the studio, and then to have some of that. So same thing with Neil's drum kit and his grooves. It's like, and that's what he appealed to him, because, obviously, people like Neil Peart or Nick Mason from Pink Floyd, I mean, they're not doing sample library for the money.
Right.
It's not, they've sold millions of records. This is
Right.
not big market. but they just like the idea of musicians being able to interact with their sound and be inspired and write new music. So it's a fun thing that we do, and I love it, and I use it myself. That's the thing. My brother runs IK Multimedia. I don't know if you knew that. He runs
No, I
IK
did not.
US. Yeah, so it's kind of like it's a family. Everybody is a family.
Oh my goodness.
Family. Well, we're not Italian, but it is. The headquarters is in Italy, in Modena, right down the street from the Ferrari factory, actually. And my brother runs the U.S. office, which is a lot of the distribution and marketing and sales, that have kind of taken it to the level that it's at, and everything you talked about, where the coolness of embracing what you're doing and supporting, and I'm all for it too. I think it's just an attitude of a slogan for IK is musicians first, and it's basically just kind of like that's what the company's all about. It's like we're all helping each other with the tools that inspire us or let us be mobile or something, or just useful things that make it possible to afford great monitors. I've got these monitors, iLoud micro monitor, and
Yes, I've heard a lot about those.
monitors that you can mix an album on. People mix, like Tom Moralgi and all these great engineers mix albums on them, and they're only a couple $100, as opposed to $10,000 Barefoot, which they also have. But you could actually mix on the $200 ones. That's incredible. So I'm very proud to be part of that, and it's a cool thing, and I'm glad it helped you out too.
Literally, someone in the chat was just saying he gives great Godfather impressions, and then you did it.
Oh yeah. Well, I do a few different impressions, but the Godfather one. Listen, Robin, I just want to say I'm glad my daughter's one.
Oh man. Well, we could definitely make this a Rush and IK multimedia interview like all day long, but I'd like to kind of dive a little bit deeper, and I'd like to know a little bit more about you personally. So Dave, where did your love of music come from? Like, where did it all start?
Well, so it's my brother and I, we're the only two siblings, and there was this kid down the street, and I'm the older brother, and this guy Brian, who had a killer record collection in the 70s, and he had an awesome stereo system with like select components and everything. And I just went down the street and I bug him all the time. Like, what's this? What's that? And he just, I don't know, inspired me. And then I bought a keyboard. Well, I took piano lessons, but it wasn't very exciting. It was classical and like not even fun classical. It was just like a very strict teacher. My whole family took lessons. And then one day I said to my mom, I'm like, I'm not really, do you mind if I quit this piano lesson with this guy? She's like, I was thinking about quitting too. And then everyone quit. Then the piano was just sitting there. So I would just bang on it and make my own sort of avant-garde music with it. And then one day she said to me, it's like, you seem to actually like the piano. I found a younger teacher. Would you want to take lessons? And so I kind of auditioned him. It was hilarious. I must have been like, I don't know, 11, 12. And I said, all right, we're going to do this my way. I said, would you be willing to just play and then I stop you and ask you what you did? He's like, yeah, we could do that. So would you be willing to, if I took an album and I played you a song, would you figure it out for me, show me how to play it? Things that you don't want to do.
Right.
And he's like, yeah, we can do that. So we can do all those things as long as you take a little bit of time to learn theory and learn some of the other stuff. And I said, deal, and that's how I did it. And then I bought a synthesizer at the Sears Mall. It was a Radio Shack Moog. I still have one.
Wow.
It's actually a really cool synth. And I'd never been to a music store. And then I went to a music store and I convinced my mom to like wrap all Christmas and birthdays of the next few years into one. And she said to me, it's kind of funny. She said, as long as you're going to stick with it, you promise you're going to stick with it. And I'm like, I promise. And then like not that long ago, I said, see, I told you I was going to stick with it. So I still have that keyboard too, actually, a Yamaha SK30. And, so that's what got me started when I was 12, 13.
So what point did you then like say, okay, I've learned this music, it's actually taken root. Now I want to make a career out of this. Like when did that transition happen?
I think, I went to Syracuse University, and with the idea that I chose the place because they had a recording studio and they had a film department and they had this communications, Newhouse School of Communications, and I wanted to do everything. I wanted to direct film. I wanted to, like all these interests. And then when I was actually there, I, would make friends with some of the professors, and they were like, you really have to kind of hone it down to what you really want to do. And then I was like, well, after doing video, I realized that one really interesting thing. It's changed somewhat since then. That was in the mid 80s. But still to this day, I think it's more feasible to produce an album that especially these days with the tools you have. But even going back then, it was a lot easier than making a film. Film would cost tens of thousands of dollars, especially to do it on film, even just to do a short. And music albums, I took a loan out for a Fostex 16 track, and I was still paying the loan off when the ADATs came out. And I was like, oh, and then of course we have, the computer, digital audio workstations now. And now you can literally make an album practically for free if you have a computer or if you have an iPad. There's software to do it. So you have no excuse. Now it's just up to you and your creativity. But that and having a love for music and music production and everything about it. Not that I have any. I wrote scripts that have never been turned into films. I still love. I'm a movie buff, so I mean I would love to do it, but it's just kind of, I don't know. Like I've learned that sometimes if you want to be great at something, you have to kind of eat, drink, sleep that for a while and pay your dues and really, and then, if you can grow from there, great. But and then one of the things that I actually do to satisfy a little bit of that kind of side of me, the cinematic side, is I do progressive rock music. So I infuse a kind of cinematic scoring. I've done some TV scoring, but not I want to score like Spielberg style films.
Right.
So that's not going to happen. I mean, maybe it'll happen, but I'm doing it anyway for myself. So there's this kind of like sci-fi film score element. And then I do concept albums and I write stories. So again, it's like, I mean, I would love to make movies of those, but without the millions of dollars budget, I'm kind of confined to making an album out of it. And in a way, it sort of makes it a little bit more unique that it's an album that you could like read a story. And especially these days, because so things have kind of changed a little bit away from albums to a certain extent, at least in the mainstream, singles and all that kind of stuff. But I've always been into albums and especially concept albums. So yeah, that's kind of what I do with my music.
Well, it sounds like you've worked with a wide variety of individuals from several different backgrounds. So this may be kind of a hard question for you to answer. But who would you say, or what would you say has inspired you the most creatively over the years?
Well, who and what, those are two drastically different things. Okay. Listen, I could name drop until you're sick. There's
Right.
really many. There's a point where it's like, oh, he's cool. Wow, that's good. And then it's like, all right, I'm sick of this guy. It's like, I don't even know if I believe him.
Right.
Some of these are just incredible, but there have been some amazing highlights, things that inspire me. One, I'll tell you two off the bat that are like, or maybe three. I'll tell you three. Significant ones. No, four. There's four. Sorry.
Here he goes, guys.
Okay, so milestone moments for me that gave me a big boost of confidence and like a little bit of validation, even though I believe that you have to kind of please yourself, and then not have to seek this outside validation, especially from your heroes.
Right.
Ironically, maybe because I believe that and I don't feel I need that outside validation from my heroes, I was able to get it anyway. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but I mean, so one of them was Keith Emerson, who I had befriended because I used to play with an artist named Kevin Gilbert in the 90s. And he worked with Kevin, um, introduced me on the radio for the first time and playing a 10-minute song on the radio. And I'll never forget it. But he told me, so what happened was he was on Planet Rock in the UK and he was a guest, and they asked him to play like ELP, like Emerson Lake and Palmer, and various things, but from his time, but then he was asked to play something really new. And he knew that I was working on my debut solo record. And so he said, and he had played on it, so he guested on it, on a different song. But he said to me, would you mind if I played the song? My album wasn't even out yet. The song called Stranded. And I said, I'd be honored, and then he said, I said, but it's a 10-minute song and this is a radio show. And he said, listen, Dave, he said, what was it like? He played the Isle of Wight, and he said I think it was pictures at an exhibition, and he'll never forget when they played that, and it was 10 minutes, or it was some 10-minute song that he had and that they had. And he's like, it's a triumph when, like Stairway to Heaven or, any of these longer songs, they'll make an exception. And he said, because I'm there, we're going to make an exception for you.
Sweet.
And it was just like, wow, this is what a way to kind of, have that experience. And then another one was Steve Hackett from Genesis. I love Genesis. They're one of my favorite bands. And I had worked with Steve a little bit on Phil Collins' son, Simon Collins' record. And I have a band, or had a band called Sound of Contact with Simon. And things kind of fell apart like they do sometimes in bands. And we split up, essentially. It's a short version of that. And I was left to kind of do my own solo album. And actually, I'd always been a background person as a musician. I like a backing vocalist and a songwriter and a producer, like the behind the scenes, not the front man. But I was so frustrated with the fact that people loved this Sound of Contact album. Dimensionaut, we won a Prague Award for Best New Band, all these promising great things.
Sweet.
And then it was just like, and I was out. And I was like, all right, that's it. I'm going to be the front man. I'm not going to rely on anybody else. I'm just going to do it. And, I was going to do it anyway, but I went to see Steve Hackett play locally here in Florida. And he knew about the situation, and he said, why don't you come with me backstage? And we were already backstage in the regular party. He said, come into the dressing room. I want to talk to you. I'm like, okay. And he sat me down. I'll never forget it. And it was like a big brother or a father or a mentor. I mean, it was just like this advice speech that he gave me. He's like, when I left Genesis, I really, I had to, get the courage and the confidence to do it on my own, all these things. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm hearing this story. I know the story. We all know, the Genesis fans know this story, but like in context of the kind of thing that my own dad or, someone would just tell you, when I played football, but it wasn't football. It was Genesis, the actual Genesis story, but in a very human, real way. Like, not just like you're reading in a magazine and hear the story of how Peter Gabriel left with Steve Hackett and all these things. It's like, no, you know what? Like, this is a person just like you or me who had a very difficult situation where they had to be, were living on top of the world. And now they're out of that whole machine and they've got to make a path for themselves. And he is a huge inspiration because Steve has been so prolific. He's put out tons of albums. He still tours. He's very successful in what he does. And he's very happy. And that was priceless to me on my journey. So those are the two, let's say, out of the many that come to mind that are just like, all right, this gave me a huge boost of confidence and a great feeling of a connection to my musical influences in a way that's like almost like also passing the torch in a way. There's been some things like that have just kind of given me a great kind of circle feeling of like, all right, I'm really into the things the music that the Beatles and the 60s and the 70s and the early 80s we're all about. And I feel like my role in the music world today is to keep that alive and expand on it. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's more needed now than ever. And this is nothing to say against the music that's coming out now, because I'm a lover of music myself. And I feel like all music does have its place, even if it's something that I don't necessarily resonate with or like, it still has its place. Um, but one of the things that seems to have been failing, at least in my eyes, over the past few years, is this element of people like with real talent playing real instruments, getting in, even if it's a VSTI instrument, like banging on a real keyboard and getting in there and like knowing, not necessarily even having to know theory, but just knowing like the feel and the flow of music. I feel like that's sort of been over the past few years just because of this sort of the, I guess, the blessing and the curse of the digital age. We've got individuals now that literally can just purchase loop packs and sing over top of that. Now, yet again, that still has a place. I'm not saying it's bad, but there's something within me. I guess maybe it's because I'm a musician too, but whenever I'm hearing a band and I hear a band behind them and I hear like the time that they've invested to make those instruments talk, the time that they've put in to write that music and to make that song what it is, and knowing like even sometimes like the back history that made the song what it is, man, there's like that needs to be shared more so now than ever. I think to show people like music is more than just a passing thing. It's not just another shiny object. And I firmly am a believer that not only is it a universal language, but I feel like if we had more of it, more good music with a good message and emotionally driven feel behind it, that a lot of the problems of the world would be dissipated, if not completely. Then again, I don't know. Some music might actually stir it up more. So, I mean, Lennon says you want a revolution, you know?
Yeah, but I think that's good. I think I can't imagine a world without music. It's the soundtrack. It's of our emotions and our feelings and thoughts. It's like fuel for these things. You know, both good and bad. But it's still potentially. But it's still, I think, a vital part. You know, of people's lives. I mean, it is, even if whether they know it or not. I mean, there's almost you can't go a day in society without hearing music, whether you want to hear it, like you're shopping and there's music playing, you know. And you're in the car and it's like, what are you gonna do? You know, listen to music, you know, or maybe a talk show or things, but it's like this is stimulation and of different levels too, like you said, like the music can really lift. I mean, you know, you watch a movie without a film score
Oh
and it's
yeah.
a really different feeling. You know,
Yeah.
music, like, you know, it'll bring you to tears, you know, and all sorts of things. I love it. And I agree with you. I think that you know, I see things from different perspectives because of being a musician myself and a producer, working with other people, but then also through IK Multimedia and Sonic Reality, I've seen everything from young beginners to old beginners to young pros to old pros. And, you know, I was just talking to somebody and they were casually saying, oh, yeah, I used that. Yeah, I used your library on a multi-platinum selling album, you know, from Jay-Z. And I'm like, oh, well, you know, you're making more money off of it than me. But no, congratulations. So I think that it's all great, and I feel like people like yourself, myself, others, Warren, you know, it's good, and people who have similar ideas about this stuff to inspire, educate. I was going to say educate, but let's say educate and also inspire. It's not like dictating, teaching, like, oh, well,
Right.
back when people really played their instruments. Or it's kind of like, listen, there are, like you said, the digital age, there's tools, there's everything. You can hit one note and rap over it, and there's your song, you know. Or you can, and even if you do that, you can craft what you rap. You know, some people look down on rap, and I'm not particularly a fan of rap style myself, but there are people with really good skills, like lyric writing. You know what I mean? It's like, well, if you know, it's not that easy. You know, it depends, and that's a whole thing. You know, art, what is art, whatever. But the fact that you can, let's say you mentioned loops, it's like you could take drum loops. So, okay, you know, and then write over it or play over it, become a better guitar player playing along with, or bass player playing along with, you know, Pierce grooves. Or you could buy a loop pack that has all the instruments and everything, and it practically writes the song for you. But you can always, like, you can even do that. I've done this sometimes, not on purpose, but just by accident. Written a song just because I had some loops, and then it gave me the idea, inspiration for the melody, and then I completely redid everything. So if you use them, I look at it like this: if you use the modern tools today as placeholders that may end up just being there forever. If it sounds good, it's okay. If it's a loop or whatever, it's like the person listening doesn't know. It's just a question of you as a music creator deciding, okay, like that's so I can get the arrangement and the writing of whatever it is together. You hear it as a demo. And what I like to do, for instance, is I probably sampled more drums than practically anybody. I've sampled a lot of drums, even things that haven't been released. And I love it. And I'm a keyboard player mainly, and I'm a frustrated drummer. So I like to play keyboard, drum keyboard. But I'll do that and I write, but I love real drummers and I almost always hire a drummer in the end. So, and they appreciate it because I can send them an example that I've programmed. One time I sent an example, and it's the only time I worked with him, to Simon Phillips, great drummer. And I just reached out to him, and that's the song with Keith Emerson on it. And it's called Crossing of Fates. And I sent him my version of the drum track. And I wasn't there. I sent it and he recorded in the studio, but he must have been like, okay, well, let me show you how it's done. And it's an incredible drum track. But then there's another drummer I work with who's fantastic named Marco Miniman. And he's amazing. And he's openly said, no, please send me an example so I have an idea of what you want. So, and then there's other times where I did it thinking I was going to get it replaced. Then I'm like, you know what? That's good. But it's all about, like, let's say networking and who you know. I mean, the best of the best. And it's kind of at this point, well, it's almost like a rarity, but then again, it could be as easy as the luck of looking around your neighborhood, is people being in the same room and playing off of each other. That itself is somewhat of a lost art, the garage band, the real garage.
Yes.
But, so anybody can do that. And I always encourage people, like, to have that experience, and, if you can. But if not, the other cool thing about the digital age is you can collaborate with musicians who live all over the world. And I do that all the time when I make albums. Like my new album has Marco Miniman, who lives in the West Coast, and then Nick DiVirgilio lives in Indiana. Two different drummers, So I'm creating my own, ideal cast, my band for my solo album per song. But it's that kind of thinking of, like, hey, you could even just be one person with a computer or an iPad or whatever it is, and you're scratching up your ideas. I know this woman named Erin Moran, and that's what she told me. She's like, because I said, I really love her music. She has a band called A Girl Called Eddie, and she just released a new album like a year or so ago, and it's great. And I asked her how she did it. She's like, well, I just write the songs and do it in GarageBand. And I just get the lyrics and the stuff, and then I bring it to really great musicians, and we book a studio, and we all play it live in the studio. And I'm like, well, that's why it sounds great. But what a cool way to work, where it's like you're just getting your scratch pad together,
right?
Get the song, make sure you have a melody and lyrics and a song, and then you can just. There's so many great musicians to work with and to find these days online. So
Can you describe a breakthrough that you had that took your productions to the next level?
So my story is very unique. It's one of the reasons why I've been able to kind of work with or meet all of these, legendary musicians, famous musicians and producers, is because of Sonic Reality and IK Multimedia. So, I kind of go hand in hand. I go to the NAMM show, which is a trade show you probably know, like every year, although with the pandemic, it's actually the first time it wasn't, but I've been going since time. And you meet all sorts of musicians there and stuff. So when I've done the sample libraries, I've done sample libraries with, I mean, because I'm so into it in terms of the authenticity. So if we're going to do, let's say Neil Peart, we're going to do it with Rush's producer. If we're doing, Nick Mason, ideally I'd want to do it with Alan Parsons. So I did libraries with Ken Scott, who's a producer engineer who recorded the Beatles, David Bowie, Supertramp, many more, and My Vision Orchestra, And so when we did Billy Cobham, or we did Terry Bozzio, we did Woody Woodmansey from Bowie's band, or Bob Siebenberg from Supertramp, or Rob Morgenstein, I was there learning. It was like a master class with Ken Scott. Oh, this is how, and then you sit there and talk, and you're hanging out with Ken Scott, and you're like, what mic did you use on John Lennon for the White Album? Oh, he used this. And they're just divulging these amazing secrets, and I'm friends with the Lord Alge brothers, Chris Lord Alge and Tom Lord Alge, and they're good buddies of mine. They're huge Genesis fans with me. So we sort of, share that bond. I met them actually backstage at a Genesis concert some years ago, decades ago, but and they've both mixed for me. So they've mixed on my albums as like a favor to me, because I don't have this huge budget from a major label. I'm an indie artist with like distribution deals with labels, but I really have like my own label, and I just do it. I empower myself to do my own music. But I have friends in high places, and they've done me a solid and have mixed some songs, and wow, that's like the template. When Tom Lord Alge mixed the song Stranded, the one I was telling you about that Keith Emerson played, it was, first of all, it's this 10-minute song that has 5 parts to it. And at the end, it sounds like all of a sudden, we're Queen or something. It's got all this bombastic harmonies, and it's actually a great engineers, and Steve Hackett's on it from Genesis. So it's like there's a heavy section, there's a quiet section, there's a big vocal section. It's like, all right, let's see if you can mix this. So that was the template for my album New World, and I had the session, and I could look at it. We even did a session later on for the NAMM show using only IK Multimedia plugins. And Tom did some great videos you can check out. If you look up Tom Lord Alge and IK Multimedia, you can see where he takes my song and breaks it down, how he mixes vocals, how he mixes drums. But for me, it was priceless because I watched him do it. I directed him as the producer to say, can you do this? Can you do that? Like what and I learned a lot that way. And I've worked with Hugh Padgham, I've worked with Mick Davis, both produced Genesis. And all of those guys, first of all, they're super nice and cool. And to me, producers and engineers, Richard Cheeky, these guys are my mentors. And to me, they're as big a rock star as the rock stars. You know what I mean? Like I read liner notes as a kid. I was always those people who made, the production and the recording and the mixing. So I've been very lucky, but at the same time, I got to say, I mean, my situation, let's say, is unique, but people can join, Produce Like a Pro, mix with the masters, Pure Mix, and they can access the greats and get all this knowledge about how to do it. And there's so much available, even online, watching your show. If you really want to learn, it's there, the inspiration and the ideas. Dave Pensado, I mean, all those guys are just, happy to share their secrets, of how to get great sounds in the studio and stuff. So, but I think I would have to say nothing. And there's Full Sail and SA, all that stuff's great, but nothing replaces experience. You have to get your hands dirty and you have to do it. And I'm always learning. And each time I do an album, I'm like, I could have done that better. Shit, I have to release it and I have to move on.
Right.
And it's like, but I keep improving, keep tweaking my studio, keep spending more money, which is not a but like the latest acquisition is a Tube Tech CL1B compressor, because some friends of mine are like, oh, it's just so good on vocals. It's a tube compressor and everything. I like analog gear as well as plugins and stuff. And I'm like, and they're really hard to get. I was on the waiting list for like 8 months from Vintage King or more, maybe a year. And they were like, and they just called me and they're like, Dave, it's finally in. I'm like, all right, I'm going to use it on my new album. I'm mixing my album next week, my new album, The Traveler. And I'm like, all right, I'll use it. Anyway, it's a process.
Awesome, man. I'm telling you what. I know you said you're not wanting to name drop, but I know I've heard at least 30 names that I'm like, ah, I would like, yeah. It sounds like all of the right doors have just sort of opened up for you at key intervals and times when they needed to open up. And honestly, from what you just said and from everything that you've said thus far, for those of you that are listening, pay attention not just to what he's saying, but also read between the lines. Like this guy is telling you, like he's devoted his life to this, and he's also making sure that what is the old saying, like chance favors the prepared.
Huh.
So because he's always been trying to be in this preparation phase of making sure that he was ready for whatever was thrown at him, when that chance would arise, well, guess who was ready? So for those of you who are wanting to make like a full-time career out of music, just keep doing what you're doing and try to be the best that you possibly can be at everything that you do. And like he has said, which is what I preach on this channel all the time, the motto around here is you can dream alone and you can create alone, but together we can achieve more. And that togetherness, like he's already stated, whenever you start to develop friendships, when you start to develop a circle of individuals who have like-mindedness, that are serious about their craft, I'm not talking about these willy-nilly guys that want to start a garage band every week and then they quit because their girlfriend got mad at them because they was, I'm not talking about those guys. I'm talking about the guys that are like rubber to the road, like this is what I want to do with my life. If you can surround yourself with those kind of individuals, you can have, and I'm not limiting anybody, you can have stories just like Dave is sharing with us right now. All you have to do is make sure that you're in the right place at the right time, you've prepared, and you've made sure that in the process, and I'm going to say it, you're not being a douchebag.
Don't be a douchebag. I want to, that's great stuff, Robert. And I want to just kind of say, like, sometimes when I say these stories, and there's some good ones in there, I like to talk about like the ones that are either funny or have some kind of personal meaning or a philosophical meaning, perhaps. And I've got a good one. I don't want to forget. I want to tell you that's really kind of mind blowing, but meaningful in that way. But I also want to just say that even though, let's say, someone like me, first of all, I haven't won a Grammy. I've got friends who've won tons of Grammys. I don't have like hits in the top 10 right now, or anything, crazy like that. So everybody has inspirations. I've just had fun. I've had fun working with a lot of great musicians, some of them famous, some of them not. But I will say this, and producers and engineers. So I will say it's not that important. It's great, but not to feel like, oh man, I'll never meet all of my heroes. It's like, you know what? The key to that even happening, or whether it did or not, is not actually important. It's not important to me. It means something to me on different levels, but if it didn't happen, the most important thing is that I created music and moved people with it. And anybody can do that. So if you're lucky enough, you have the icing on the cake is meeting your heroes or meeting people that you admire and stuff. But the cake is you. So it really is. It sounds corny, maybe cliche, but it's really true. And I'll never forget, there was a test, like a life test. You won't believe, it's crazy. But so I had my debut album, and again, my first time out as the lead singer, as the front man, because I was comfortable behind my stacks of keyboards, keyboards, nice, just to hang out, like just be not responsible for entertaining the crowd and singing. But I love to sing, I love to write lyrics, and I was finally going to perform on a show, on a cruise called a festival on a boat called Cruise to the Edge, which is usually hosted by Yes, the band Yes. And I had the Dave Kersner Band, our debut performance, which was going to be on the cruise, and then also a few shows before the cruise. And then just so happens that at that time, I was invited to join a charity event in Northern England that I've played before, that a friend of mine, Francis Dunnery, did. And this time, the special guest that I'd be playing with was going to be Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin.
What?
And I had to choose between my own music and going to play like a bucket list Zeppelin songs with Robert Plant. And I chose me. and because I had to, this was, I couldn't like skip my own band's rehearsals. I was the musical director. I had to tell everybody what to do and everything, and it was just too much. It was not possible. And so I thought to myself, like, the universe is having a really good laugh right now. Like, let's like how he's gonna. And and then I watched the keyboard players, a friend of mine, do it, on videos after, and I'm like, oh, so lucky. Like, you got to play Zeppelin songs with Robert Plant. And I'm like, and I actually said no, and it wasn't for money, it was for charity, but it was just that experience. But I learned a valuable lesson right there, which is like, all this time, it wasn't about having a resume that read played with Robert Plant or any of those other things. It was about something I could have done decades ago. I could have done when I was 15. Just be like, all right, I'm going to write my songs. I'm going to sing them. I'm going to put out albums, and I'd have a whole catalog of albums, but I actually waited. I was a late bloomer to do that. I was around, playing keyboards with people and doing cool things. But now I have a catalog of albums I'm building under my own name. I'm putting out my third solo album, and this started in 2014 only. We're in 2022. So I have my third solo record, and I have a band called In Continuum as well, where I sing part of the time. But, my solo records, I sing the whole time. And like, that's what I love to do. So even recently, there was a big artist, actually, I can't say who it is. And Tom Lord-Alge had recommended me as a keyboard player. And I really like this artist, and I would normally want to play keyboards with him. In fact, I auditioned for him in the 90s and didn't get the gig, but I could maybe get the gig, or, you're not going to get it if you don't try. But I don't even want to try, because I'm kind of like, what? That's cool, but I'd be playing their music, and that's great for a while, and it'd be good for my career and everything. But I could be making my own album right now, and that's what I want to do the most. So even if it's less successful or less money, it's so to be able to say that, I think, is a plateau. It's beautiful to reach, and it can happen for anybody at any time, at any level, but it has to come from you, and it has to be genuine, that you believe that yourself, like, kind of like, I'm doing what I love, and that's paramount.
I appreciate that, man. That's honesty at its greatest right there. Whenever you have clarity of purpose and you know exactly what you want and what you want to do, a lot of people struggle with that. So I commend you, honestly, for making those tough decisions, because in the long run, I mean, you're going to end up happier in the long run if you actually fulfill what you feel like your purpose was anyway. So
yeah, you can't lose. If you have yourself, it's maybe it sounds corny, I don't know, but it really is true. It's like, it's not a justification or a rationalization if you, like, let's say, don't get a gig that you really want or whatever. It's if you believe that it's true, it's kind of like, well, like, for instance, I have another band that I'm in with the younger generation guys from Yes, the band Yes. So there's Billy, John, and Jay, and who I play with Yes, and Jimmy, who played on Union, and then me. I'm the only one in the band who wasn't, like, actually in Yes. And we're doing a new album. The first album, sorry, I had to plug the computer in, otherwise I move. The first album,
as long as you didn't go to the bathroom.
No. We're good there. It's called Arc of Life. And the first album, I didn't write any of the songs, and one of the main, or produce it. And that's my main thing as a songwriter and a producer, or sing on it. But I'm the keyboard player. I'm like, okay, no problem. And then we're working, and he's like, Billy Sherwood is the leader of the band. He's like, yeah, we'll all write together for the next album. But because of the pandemic, we can't all really get together so easily. We don't live in the same place. And he didn't want to send files back and forth in terms of writing. So I'm like, okay. So I'm not really writing on the new record either. And I love writing. And, there's so many benefits too. Like, you make more money if there's publishing and all that stuff. But it's just like, I'm just playing keyboards on it again. And some people will be like, oh, I'm leaving, or I'm whatever. I need this and I need that. It's like, I have the freedom of just being like, saying, okay. And just taking it as it is and enjoying it for what it is. And I know that it's like, well, I have my outlet for creativity. I write songs. I can write 10 albums if I want. When you do that, it's so liberating. It's like, you don't need anybody I mean, if you can get to that point, whatever it is, maybe you're like, well, I don't sing. It's like, okay, well, what about an instrumental album? Does it make you happy? The only thing that matters is, does it make you happy? Because if it makes you happy, it will make other people happy too. And that's the most important thing. You're like feeding other people's happiness and your own. Then, all the other stuff is just kind of, like I said, it's icing on the cake, whether you make a ton of money from it. I mean, as long as you can live and make a living, maybe it's a hobby or it's a side thing or whatever. For me, even like, working with Sonic Reality and IK helps me afford to live so that I can do the art the way that I want to do it without having to do flavor of the month, following trends and, fitting in with, just do whatever I actually feel like doing. So I don't know, just food for thought.
No, I appreciate that, because and yet again, what he's saying here is golden, because he's not seeking validation from outside sources. He's finding the validation from within. And whenever you travel down that path, you're going to end up being a lot more stable as a musician. I've talked about this a lot on this channel and it's something that is hardly ever discussed, but it needs to be talked about. Creatives in general, musicians, anybody creative, typically they will have issues with having their emotional roller coasters. All of us know that we at times wear our feelings on our sleeves. We go through bouts of depression, anxiety, issues like that. And a lot of that is caused because we're creative individuals and we feel like there's something within us that needs to be shared with the world. When it's not immediately received like we think it should be, oh no, our world comes crashing down. And so if we don't try to seek that validation, though, from outside sources, if we try to find that validation from within and say, hey, look, I want to create a record because it's within me, it makes me feel good. Like he's just said, if it resonates with you, that chances are with 5 billion people in the world, it's going to resonate with at least one other person. And at the end of the day, I know myself, when I write my own personal music, that's all that matters to me. If one other person in the entire world tunes in, likes that song, I'm happy. I'm a happy guy. So kudos to you, man, for just kind of like peeling the onion back and showing us out there.
Well, it's I've learned from others as well, and it's kind of cool to pass on the philosophy, because what you're saying is really important. And I think also, like, what I like to do is even help break that down even further. Like when you say, validation within, and then it almost becomes something you've heard so much that you're like, well, yeah, it'd be nice, but I don't know. And like, it's so easy to want that outside validation. So what I like to convey is, let's say, a tool, which is simply, all right, if you're not going to validate within because for whatever roadblock you've got in your head about that, think of it this way. Outside validation is not important. It's just not important. So if you, and then that's an easy thing to shed. It's just like, okay, you know what? I don't need approval. I don't need that outside. And that itself is liberating. And then what it really means is that you have self-validation without having to figure out how to do that or whatever. It's like, listen, it's really simple. You're a musician for a reason. You're a musician because you're drawn to it. You like it. There's something about it that makes you happy doing it. And so it's like, but you might be unhappy if you feel like, man, no one ever buys my albums, or no one's giving me an award, or no one, wants to talk to me, or, like labels. I mean, how many times I've been turned down from record labels? It's almost like rite of passage. Like, you have, I mean, I've been in like the office of Peter Gabriel's A&R guy, or Beck, and like at Geffen, I'm just sitting there playing my stuff, and he's like telling me, nah. And like, I remember, I'll never forget, I was in the office of Tony Berg, who's an A&R man, also a producer himself. And he rejected my tape, whatever the band I had at the time. And before that, I had like taken it poorly, like, it's never going to happen. All this sad things that and I will never forget that moment, because I was like, don't worry about it. And I just had a great conversation with him and stuff. I'd worked on an Amy Mann record, or just helping them out with a Mellotron at his studio before. And we were just talking about Mellotrons. We were talking about Kevin Gilbert, who he liked as well, and Genesis. And then I played in this Genesis thing that I did that was like a tribute show. And he's like, he loved it. He's like, can I play this for Peter Gabriel? I'm like, yeah, sure. And it was like, man, I mean, I was my mid 20s. So I mean, because I'm twice that now. So the maturity is easier when you're older, but to have some of that then when you're younger is just great. Because if you can find that, I didn't fully have it, but that was a moment of kind of like, you know what, I don't need a record deal. But I'll tell you something, that was in the 90s when you almost kind of did. But these days, anybody can put out an album on iTunes or whatever. And CDs are inexpensive to make, so you really don't need a record. And with companies like IK Multimedia and all these tools to be able to like fill the gaps of what you need to create an album and put it out on CD. I was just talking to my CD manufacturer, getting quotes, and I'm thinking to myself, man, it's inexpensive. You could even put out a CD of like a couple hundred copies and sell it, give it to your friends or do shows and sell it at your shows. But like the one thing you have to do is you have to make the effort. You have to do it. You have to have the drive and not the need outside of yourself, but the need for you to get from A to Z on something and go, okay, this is complete. I'm happy with it. I'm proud of it. And if no one likes it, like you said, if one person likes it, then it's a success. It really is. It seems like a rationalization, but when you're able to, I remember one time, sorry, I got stories. We were playing a show. We were doing a tour, and there was like a place right in between, like in Ohio somewhere, where it was just there because it was along the way, and it was like, all right, let's play there. And it was the smallest turnout. It was literally probably not this few, but it was like 5 people or something there. It probably was more, but it felt like there was like 5 people. Like, and the other shows were pretty good. And this was like, and I loved my band so much that night because we played like we were at Madison Square. It was no different. We had played, and everyone that was there loved it. They were just thrilled, And I thought to myself, that's it right there. If you can reach a level where you can play for 5 people and play your heart out, or with no one, like play your heart out in rehearsals, or you can put out an album and one person says they love it and that's enough for you, then the irony is that if you're at that level, there'll be thousands of those people. It's like, but you have to not need the thousands of people to be able to get the thousands of people, something like that, I think.
No, that makes total sense. And there's a couple here in the chat that they said we are totally not opposed to you dropping names. Keep doing it. So Micah actually has a question. He says, what was it like working with Alan Parsons?
Okay. First of all, my claim to fame is that I shared a pastrami sandwich with Alan Parsons. That made it real. He's so cool. He's really, really nice. And we were doing different sample sessions at different studios. And we were actually in New York after an AES show. Alicia Keys did this like private party performance at her producer studio. And they had one of these EMI TG 1 2 3 4 5 consoles. So when we're at the party, I booked a day. I said, look, Alan's here, the console's here, let's do some work. So, because I'm also doing a Pink Floyd tribute that he engineered on a little bit as well for fun, just because, And then he said to me, he's like, there's a really good deli. You want to share a pastrami sandwich? And again, it was just one of those moments where I'm like, I'm sharing a sandwich, which I don't even normally eat, with Alan Parsons. This just got real. So, but in all seriousness, really cool guy. He is very kind of like humble and quiet, and I'll say something funny. I mean, he has like he's so forthright with information that it's almost like you gave him a drug for truth, like that they tell the truth,
right?
Like you just test it. And you're like, how much did you get paid to work on Dark Side of the Moon? Oh, I only got paid that. And you're like, wow, I can't believe he's telling me all this. But I mean, you pick those guys' brains, especially in that context, by the way. I've met people at backstage at concerts. It's different. You have like a split second to say something. Everyone always says the same thing. Oh, you're great and blah, blah, blah. And I think you got to understand from them, like it becomes noise. They hear it, the same thing so many times. Oh, thank you. It's like great. They're gracious, but I love the music. It was really, it's like, but when you are able to have a real conversation about something, and even outside of music, actually, it's more interesting to them because they're always talking about music. But also just in, like, let's say, a casual context, you hear funny stories, like, I mean, I don't remember offhand Alan's stories, but Nick Mason told me the story. It's just a cute story, but like, how he went, was, because he's in Pink Floyd, was taken to this high-end restaurant. There was like a seafood restaurant in London where it's a real gimmicky, like they give you headphones and there's the ocean sounds while you eat the seafood. And he said that he called the waiter over and he said, listen, I work in audio business and everything. And I just wanted to say that the seagulls are a little too loud. Things like that, or just stories about um, the Beatles, with Ken and also Alan, also, as well. You could see Alan, by the way, in the Get Back documentary. Have you seen the Get Back documentary?
I've seen bits and pieces.
I watched the whole thing. It was great. And you could see Alan there. And, they have priceless great stories of, work. And then, he told me one thing was really interesting, because I like to know, the stories of the people and like what happened and all these things. I even tried to get Eric Wolfson and it's Lenny Zakatek, the original guys from Parsons, and Alan to talk together, not knowing the whole legal thing or any of that stuff. I was just like, can't we all get along? I almost did the Godfather, but and then sadly Eric died, and I recorded some stuff with Lenny, but just seeing, like, for instance, like asking Alan personally, like how the Alan Parsons project started and why he didn't engineer more Pink Floyd albums, because he did Dark Side of the Moon, one of the best-selling albums of all time, and he didn't do Wish You Were Here. And from him, I'm sure he must have told the story, must have been asked or whatever, but I never read it, I never knew, and he just said, well, he had to make a choice, just kind of like what I told you with Robert Plant or me, and it was like Pink Floyd or me, and he chose Alan Parsons Project. He couldn't do both engineering for Pink Floyd and the Alan Parsons Project. And in his case, what a fascinating story his is, because he wasn't even the singer. Now he is, but like it was under his name, and he was the engineer and producer, and yet made it happen. And I always admired that because, like I said, my love for engineers and producers. Before I decided to just actually be a frontman, similar to his story and Steve Hackett, where it was just kind of like, all right, I'm the guy in the back. I'm like, all right, I'm going to be the guy in the front. But growing up, I always thought I was going to be in the guy in the back, kind of like him, where it's like the Dave Kersner project, something where it's just like, I'm going to put a bunch of people together. We're all going to. So yeah, another hero of mine, or someone I look up to, since I was a kid.
So if you were forced to be reduced to only using $300 worth of gear, now that's assuming that you still have a computer, a DAW, everything like that, what would be your first decisions?
Well, one of the things that's great about, let's say, IK Multimedia, just to say, and they're not the only company, but it's kind of a leader in this particular thing. You have the essentials. Like, for instance, there's this great software called T-Rax. And, if you want to get into collecting virtual versions of this analog gear I was talking about earlier, tube compressors, EQs, Pultecs, all these Neves, API, SSL, all that stuff that's been used on great records, you can get it. And if you have enough budget, more than 300, you can get the max bundle of all of them and everything. But if you don't, there's a product called Mixbox that has like, a few $100 and you've got like a whole rack, like a lunchbox of a lot of that same stuff, maybe lighter versions, whatever, but you have beautiful sounding EQs and compression, things that you would need for a mix. And then, like you said, you have your computer, you have your DAW, so getting Mixbox on that side. And then let's say Sample Tank, and I'll give you guys like a secret. And this is, again, kind of rare, very rare. Sample Tank is free. It's, it didn't used to be this way, but it's an open-ended sample player, and it comes with some samples. And of course, the versions that have the sounds can range, hundreds of dollars. But you can literally go to ikmultimedia.com and download Sample Tank free, and it comes with a few sounds. And you could buy some sounds in the custom shop. There's a custom shop app, and be off to the races. And especially like specific things you need. But what I love about Sample Tank more than any other plugin from any other company, and it just so happens that it's IK. And I didn't invent Sample Tank; it existed, and that's why I came to IK to begin with, and partnered with IK, and then brought my brother in way back in the early 2000s. Was because Sample Tank Sample Tank One, was the best sounding all-in-one kind of workstation. So I came from that world of doing samples for Roland, Alesis, the QS series, the vintage cards, all that stuff. These workstations, there were like $2,000-3,000 in hardware. And I was very interested to see when the computer, making music in the computer is like, all right, we can do recording in the computer, but can we do those things in the computer? Because that's interesting. Save a lot of money, So that's what Sample Tank does. But at this point with Sample Tank 4, it's open. So you can just get it, use it. And then once you have a sound, listen, as a producer, as a sound designer, even if I had a sine wave in there, all the filters and effects and everything you can do with it, you could make great music with a sine wave in that. So it's powerful processing inside, like nothing else I've seen. And it's easy to use. I love Kontakt and Nader Instruments. I use that as well. It's complex, deep. It does other things, but it doesn't do what Sample Tank does. Sample Tank, it's this little secret weapon because not everybody knows about it. So I would say, you can make a record with Sample Tank and a few libraries and Mixbox and your DAW. And, if you had to whittle it down, and sometimes I do, because I'm way into spending, unfortunately, a lot of money on analog gear and all that kind of stuff. I just like it. I just like it. But if I had to, I can make a record inside the box. And I'm also that way with a lot of plugins, not just from IK. I get plugins from all sorts of different companies, Brainworks and FabFilter. I love those. And I have tons of them, but I don't always use them. Sometimes I just gravitate to the things I was just mentioning, the things I know, like the IK plugins that I use, or I do use FabFilter Cube 3 a lot, and Melodyne, and different things that are just kind of like, when you whittle it down, I wouldn't want to be without Melodyne, but you're starting to get into more expensive budget. But that's
next level right there.
I just did a song. It's not just for vocals. I just did a song. We're working on maybe a tribute to raise money for the Ukraine. So a singer sent me a melody, and I was like, oh, that might fit with a rhythm track I have, but it was in a different key. And I was like, well, let me just take the bass part, put it into Melodyne, I transposed it. Perfect. That's a great tool. So I think some tools, like, you really should have a budget of at least $1,000 for even just for software. You need a good interface. IK makes a good one. IK makes a really good one called the Axio, or even the Axio Solo. I like a lot. It's a little less expensive for recording vocals, bass, and guitar. And it's actually the best one, I feel, for bass and guitar, because it has something called a Z-Tone DI, which is a variable impedance DI. Pretty much almost all DIs on interfaces are fixed. And what that means is every guitar and pedals, everything has a different impedance. There's no standard for it. So to be able to change it, you can actually dial in a better direct signal. And then you have the option then to either put it through something like Amplitude, which is a virtual amp and effects rig, or as a reamp out and converts it back between low Z and high Z. So you can actually go into an amp and record both direct and the amp sound with a mic if you wanted to do that, or you could do it later. You could do it at the same time, or you could do it later. And as a producer myself, I like to work with guitar players and bass players who give me a DI clean signal, because in case there's a problem with their amp or it doesn't sound that good or whatever, you have infinite possibilities to reamp it inside the box, inside with Amplitude or other software. So that's a good way to do it. It's a handy little Swiss Army knife, as well as having a decent, for the very good for the money mic pre. Now, if you have the money, if you can get a lunchbox with an external mic pre like a Neve or an API, it's that much better. But just like I was saying before, when you talk about, let's say, collaborating with musicians, and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to start somewhere. Let's say I'm going to start with sequencing it, and then I'm going to use those as placeholders and replace them. You can, when I have a great guitar player, okay, I'll have a guitar player play this part. I just played it just to get the idea across, or even from the keyboard, and then a guitar player or a drummer or whatever. Same thing with the gear. You got to start somewhere. So you need an audio interface, like you said, a DAW computer, enough RAM and all that stuff. And then you're like, all right. And you could start off with a cheap Rode mic or something like that. And then eventually you can add components like, okay, I'm going to add, I've saved up money or whatever it is, or I've just decided to make the next step. I'm going to get a mic pre. I'm going to like an external mic pre. And if I can't afford a Neve, I'll get a Golden Age one, which is like a Neve, but it's $250 or whatever it is. Or I'm going to get a better mic. I'm going to get a Neumann, or I'm going to, whatever it is. And each of those elements, it's a money pit. It is a rabbit hole that you go down and you'll never return from. And you'll probably get divorced if you're married. And that's the price that you have to make. I'm kidding. But you build your studio rig as you afford it, but you don't wait. Don't think that's another thing too. It's kind of works hand in hand. We're talking about outside validation. Don't think I need to have a studio like Warren Hewer, or Dave Kersner, or Robert here, or anybody. I need to have 4 guitars behind me. I can't make a record until I have 4 guitars behind me. I only have 1. Listen, I'll make an album with trash cans, banging on trash cans, bowing them. I mean, I'll make an album with like a beat up old piano. I have a beat up old guitar that I write songs on all the time. I love that thing. It's a Danelectro, and it has like the finish on it is like a 70s kitchen countertop. It's a weird little funky thing, but it's great. Doesn't matter. Music has to do with notes, chords, melodies, lyrics, bass lines, rhythms. Everybody has that available to them. And so it starts there, and then the rest is just building around that.
Awesome. Dave, if someone wanted to find out more about you, about your upcoming album, which we haven't even really touched on that much, I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about that too. Where would be a best place for them to find you, find out more about that album that's coming out?
You can go to davekersner.com, KERZNER. That's a good hub for finding different things. You can also follow me, on social media, Instagram and all that stuff. Or you can Google me and find me. I'm omnipresent. You'll be sick of me very. The new album is called The Traveler. It's a concept album. It kind of ties in my last 2 albums, New World and Static, as a story, and even a few other albums, Satellite. There's kind of a cool recurring character, this character, The Traveler. And it's about, it's kind of based on me in some ways, in the sense, and it's based on anybody. You can find yourself within there, because I like to put layers into the stories where it could be taken as a sci-fi story about some time traveler, or it can be how we are metaphorical and how we kind of get lost in the past or dreaming of the future, kind of like what we're talking about, and sometimes forget to be present and get the most in the present moment, because in reality, it's all you really have ever is the present. Past is gone, the future hasn't happened, and it's not guaranteed. But you have now, and there's a lot to right now. There's a lot that you can do. What you work with what you've got, and don't wait for something to happen. So all that philosophy stuff we're talking about is also sometimes the things that I write about. So that's a big theme in the album, The Traveler, where, he's, so in the sci-fi story, he's got this ability to time travel through his mind and sort of telepathically kind of appear vicariously through living beings and things in different times. And there's this one song that actually I might even sing today. I have to finish the vocals for it, about traveling, just curious. He travels so far into the future to where there's no trace of us left on Earth, and just to experience the peace of not having to see a war and all the terrible things that that happen, but just to get that perspective of what. And I've had that feeling uh, driving cross country. There's a few places that look almost as epic as the Grand Canyon, but without all the commercial stuff around there. There's
Right.
this one, it's called Lookout Mountain. I forget what it was. And I went there and there wasn't a soul in sight. It was just me on top of this kind of like lookout thing. And you could see all the rock formations and all the layers and everything. And it was quiet. And it was deep, actually. It was really like, whoa, like the earth has been around for millions of years and it'll be around longer after us. And we're like a blip, and like the whole thing is just like we are a part of this whole thing, but it's massive and big, and kind of come back to our world, our made up man-made world of conflict with each other, and fighting each other and the differences between each other, and go, actually it's a miracle that we even exist. We exist. Like, don't take it for granted. Like you're, or if you're alive, or just if you have any ability to do anything. I mean, it's like, do it and enjoy it, and don't get all caught up in this stuff, because it's like you have a window of time that you're alive. It's an unknown amount of time. I mean, all those kind of things where you just appreciate you know life, your existence, and everything, and the context of that existence too, and history and all that stuff. So that's what I'm really into, thinking about, talking about. So I've put that into the songs poetically, and yet at the same time, you just listen to it for the music, because there's great musicianship, there's great playing, and it's melodies, and you don't have to sit there and get all heady with it and go, oh, he's talking about. It's like some people. I'm totally cool with that, but I like to give those layers when people do listen, to give them food for thought, something thought provoking.
Well, I know the album artwork is awesome. I love the artwork. So, in
Well,
fact,
that's
almost,
Rafalo
what's that?
artist. Well, this album, The Traveler, I stepped it up. Well, I mean, I've actually worked with a lot of great artists, who are, but Rafal Lubinsky is a world famous artist who has done posters for the opera, New York Opera, and Earth Day, and his work is in museums and everything. Like, he's just a great artist. My family's in the art business, and I used to have an art gallery in Soho, and my mom was his agent for a while, and I pulled a favor. I pulled a favor to be able to have not only this great album cover, but I did something that you like. Basically, so I have the original painting, so I own that, and then I got him to sign 50 prints of it. And his prints normally, sell for, let's say $500 or more, depending on what it is, $1,500 graphics. But this is a limited, just to 50, signed and numbered. And then I have a version of my album. It's on sonicelements.bandcamp.com. I use Bandcamp, and I use Sonic Elements as like a label from Sonic Reality, where, I mean, people, you can just buy the album for $20 on CD or whatever, the pre-order. But I put this version that some people like to get, where they like to get deluxe box sets with extra discs and extra swag. I make like laminated backstage passes, commemorative stickers and things. But then this time I'm like, all right, I only have 50, and there's like 35 left with the actual print signed by the artist. I don't even sign it. Like, I sign the other stuff, but I don't sign this like actual artwork that Lubinsky fans would totally buy. But the only way to buy it is with the music. So for them, if they catch wind of it, it's like, oh, I'm buying an Lubinsky like I normally would. And there's only 50 of them. Wow, that's not usually the case. But this has a soundtrack. So it's kind of an interesting bridge between the two worlds, even though I'm not marketing it to art collectors.
Right.
But if they search it, hashtag Lubinsky, whatever, and they're like, wait, what's the deal with this? I have to buy an album, to get the art. And it's like, yeah, you do. But the people
who are buying it have something they can frame and put on their wall. It's just kind of a cool, fun thing to do. And I love the artwork, and it was custom made for the album by a great artist. So I'm excited about it. And I have the original painting, so I'm going to frame it and put it
That's
out.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. A lot of people don't take a lot of notice to stuff like that. Like they feel like they've prepared the song and they've taken all this time to create the song. Like, and then I've seen where artists like you put months into this and now you're just going to drop like a stock JPEG image on the front of your album. Like, think about it, man. Think about it.
No, there's nothing wrong with that either if it fits the music for them. You know,
Right.
I'm the kind of person, I love every aspect of making an album. I love even editing. I was just editing before and I was like, yeah, kind of like, it's kind of relaxing, kind of shifting the timing of things or doing a little editing, cleaning up tracks. I'm like, even that out. But like doing, sometimes I've done the artwork myself, manipulating stock images and things like that. Or I've hired artists, and again, it's the same kind of thing. Sometimes you get an idea, and because even with Obinsky, he was even open to some of the ideas I had about I wanted a field and doors floating and everything, and he's like, "Yeah, I could do that." But then he made it his own, with this flower coming out and an eyeball in the center and all this stuff, and I'm like, "All right, it's kind of almost like a collaboration with an artist." Like that. But I do that with my album Static. It's full of little Easter eggs. Like I named all the, it's a dystopian city with people with TV heads walking around, and that was my idea. I showed him a picture of a TV set that I saw at the NAMM show. It was like it looked like someone had their hair in a bun, and it was like a '60s TV set. I said that would be really cool. A bunch of people walking around with TV set heads, and so and of course he's just Ed Unitsky. He's a great artist and has done a lot of album covers. So, whether I'm working with him or Christine Leakey, who did New World with me, you share your ideas with somebody that's their skill, that's their talent that they bring to the table. And also the other thing we didn't talk about, but when you're like thinking nothing is out of reach, there's always a way. But like if you think, oh well, I don't know, because I mean it wasn't free to do the Obinsky thing. That was probably the most expensive album cover I've done, even if though I got a good deal because of my connections. But like the word barter is important too. Sometimes the good old days, back in the good old days before there was even money, people would like say, "Hey, I grew tomatoes, you grew potatoes. Let's swap."
Right.
And so you can find people who their skill is this and your skill is that, and you go, "Hey, listen, I'll do this. Would you be willing to swap? I'll play guitar in your album if you'll do, you know, um, the artwork for my CD and things like that." I've done that a lot, and it helps you do it like it helps you both. So it's a good thing to think about.
Well, Dave, I've got a couple more curveball questions.
Sure.
Okay. This is a two-part question.
All right.
The first being, what is your favorite color?
Blue or maybe ultraviolet even.
Awesome. Okay. What does the color blue or ultraviolet even, what does that smell like?
Uh, Good question. Smells okay. Well, they're two different ones, so now I made it even harder. Blue smells like clean, fresh air coming straight from the sky. And ultraviolet smells like exhaust at an airport. I just like airport lights. I'm kidding about the smell, but I always like the airport lights.
Right.
Landing one.
Awesome. Well, Dave, man, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Thank all of you who are in the chat that have been active and helping each other with links. Evidently, there is a sample tank freebie that's going on right now as well for the, let's see, it wasn't the CV80. Which one was that? It was the V80. So evidently that's going on right now. And as I've already said on the channel here numerous times, and this guy right here is definitely a proponent of that, IK Multimedia. Go and check out their products. We're actually giving away an iRig Pro Duo IO
Nice.
here within a few days. That's going to definitely help. We just are tying up the loose ends now to the culmination of the Studio Without Walls contest. So thank you also to all of you who have entered that. And I'm sure in some small way, shape, or form, Dave had his hand in that, like he has in everything else in the music industry. Or so it would seem.
No, I mean, IK is a big company and there's a lot going on. I don't have a hand in everything. I don't. But the what I was saying before, just to understand what in context of this giveaway, the V80. So that's basically sounds that you can put in Sample Tank. But Sample Tank itself, Sample Tank 4 is always free. The basic software. It's like a shell. It's like a player, and it has all the capabilities, and it doesn't actually limit the capabilities. Some of the all of the IK plugins, you download them and they work for free for 2 weeks in full. So you can, it's like a rental, free rental. So you could even make an album with everything, and if you could do it within 2 weeks, you can make an album. There's a lot of cool things you can do just with the demo versions, but there are also some of these free versions. So Sample Tank CS or Sample Tank 4 CS or Sample Tank Free, I forget what it's called, Sample Tank 4 Free. You can just go and you can download it, and it actually just continues to work. It doesn't time out after 2 weeks. And, then it becomes like, all right, well, how is it free? What am I spending money on? You're spending money on the sounds, the sound libraries or the plugins that work with the Sample Tank engine from IK. However, occasionally you can either win them in a contest from Robert here, or you just get them in a promo. So this V80 is a nice promo. And again, I think that the philosophy of IK is, it's a company like any other company. It needs to make money and, profit and work as a machine, just like, to be able to afford to bring all these things. It's a very successful company. But since it is a successful company, it's in the position to be able to give away things to help musicians get a spark of creativity or get going with something really good, something that's good for you, like in the sense that, everything I talked about, my passion for equipment and studio elements, all those things. It's like, of all things you could spend money on, music never hurt anybody. I mean, unless you crank it too loud and someone, but you know what I mean? It's good for the soul. So all these things, like if it inspires you, then that's priceless. And there's so much within that one company. And then also, like I said, everything I talk about is not biased to just IK. I use a lot of different products from different companies, and it's all good. Again, it's just a matter of what your workflow is and how, but if you get to try something like that Pro Duo you're giving away, that's a great interface. It's not as great as the Axe-IO, the one I mentioned, that if you really want to step it up, but even if you own an Axe-IO, the iRig series is fun because it's portable. And if I wanted to record myself stereo anywhere, it's just like the size of an old Walkman. You remember those? And so it has 2 mic pre's with like phantom power. You can plug guitars into them, and it's an interface you can use with either an iPhone or an iPad or a computer, Mac or PC, and it's handy. And to me, it's like gear is great, but if it meant you could write a song on a vacation or something, then it's super valuable. It's like the song.
Right. Yeah, and that was the whole premise behind the idea that I had when I put this all together. I reached out to BandLab and IK Multimedia, and I said, how cool would it be when everybody is finally starting to get to go out of their doors, out of the houses, if we could have a entire, song contest built around that, like a studio without walls. Like, we've been inside these walls long enough. Let's go outside and make some music. And they jumped on it, and it was pretty good success. I didn't get quite as many individuals that I would have loved to have got that, but there's a lot of people that are I'm still getting emails. Sorry, it wasn't ready yet. So I know how that is too. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This is going to be an evergreen piece of content, so you guys can come back and watch this at any given time. It also will be repurposed into a podcast. So if you did not know, the Home Studio Simplified show does have a podcast. It's on iTunes. You can also access it on the homestudiosimplified.com website under the podcast tab. You can even subscribe right from there and listen to it right in your browser, whatever mobile device you're using. So if y'all want to go back and check this out later, y'all know where to go. So thank you so much, Dave, for hopping on, and we appreciate everything that you're doing for the music community. And we're looking forward to hearing from you and from this album, and hopefully to have you back on the show here shortly to talk about some other cool stuff that's coming out.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Robert.
All right, man. And we are not live. All right.